So you're going to hear about today collagen again, but because there was a BBC article and I wanted to clear a few things up about that. And then I had a question about CBD supplements. And then I also had a question about cancer and the oral contraceptive pill, which I think is a really, really important thing to clear up. So that is what you're going to get today. The other thing I want to mention is Commit to Six. Early bird opens on Friday. If you're not on the priority list, you will not get an early bird space and you will save money getting an early bird space. I built this program specifically for people who want to not just lose weight, but keep it off forever. So what you learn here, you will use for the rest of your life, which is why I'm so confident in saying that it's the best investment that you'll make. Other point I want to make on this is something I was researching for the book earlier. Where is it? This is really interesting. I hadn't seen this research. Now, to caveat it, it's observational research, right? So you can't be like X causes X, but and there are probably some confounding variables in this. But there's a very specific reason that I'm very committed to helping people maintain their results after they lose weight. And it goes beyond the obvious of just like, you want to get in shape, you want to stay in shape. There's actually damage that happens after repeated cycling of weight. So like your standard yo-yo dieting as a woman. And one of the pieces of research that I was looking at, and again, I do want to caveat this with like, I don't want to be adding to fear mongering and like really scary headlines and things. But this study did find that women who cycle their weight, which was defined as losing and then regaining 10 pounds of weight, were associated with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of stroke, reduced overall mortality, or higher rates of, is that the way you're at? Anyway, more likely to die younger than someone who hasn't cycled their weight independently of final body weight. Now, some of the factors within this could be that like people are cycling weight because they have some kind of illness and they would be involved in that. There could be eating disorders involved in that as well. There are various things that could be going on, but we do see this trend. And this was a really big study. This was a study of over 150,000 women. So like even when you're looking at observational data, that's actually quite strong data given the population size. And as much as that might be quite like, if you're someone listening and you're like, oh my God, that's me, I'm a classic yo-yo dieter, like what I don't want to do is give you anxiety. But like I also want to be realistic that actually yo-yoing with your weight causes damage, and it actually might be significantly worse than just like potentially staying at a slightly higher body weight. And this is probably partly to do with the dieting techniques that people are using when they end up yo-yo dieting, i.e. not a particularly sensible approach. And then the other part of this that was really interesting is that there were specific reasons that were given for this. And the first one was something more to do with your cardiovascular system. It appears that each weight loss cycle is slightly increasing arterial stiffness and impairing endothelial function, which is actually something we spoke about on the live, if you haven't watched every single one, but it is a marker of your vascular health, essentially. So that was how it was impacting your cardiovascular health. And then part of this is metabolic. So repeated cycles of restriction and then refeeding can impact insulin sensitivity and fat distribution. And then the other part is composition. So if you're consistently yo-yoing up and down, but you're doing that in a very restrictive way, which tends to be the typical yo-yo dieter, then what can happen, and we see this now a lot with medication like Ozempic, where if you're on a very, very low calorie diet, you also lose lean mass, especially if you're not exercising. And again, many yo-yo dieters, not all, but many don't exercise, which means that you're losing fat, but you're also losing lean mass. And then when you regain the weight, if you're not exercising, you're just regaining fat. So actually your body composition is worse. And this is why some of these outcomes are there. But again, this doesn't have to be the case. You can do this right. You can do it once. This is our whole approach on Commit to Six. You lose the weight and then you actually keep it off. So if you do want to join the waiting list for that, it's over at esgfitness.co.uk/Commit commit. And now I will get on to the question about collagen. So a few people sent me the article from the BBC on collagen. And to summarize it, it basically said that there might be some small benefit to skin elasticity. And this isn't actually particularly new research. I think it's a meta-analysis from a couple of years ago. And what meta-analyses do is they take the full body of literature and then they pick out like the key findings from numerous studies. Unfortunately, what they did was they included mostly studies that were very biased, i.e. industry funded. And secondly, and this is a problem with all research on collagen, is many of those weren't actually controlled. So you're comparing collagen to nothing and then saying collagen is better than taking nothing, which I would agree with. If you have the general population of women who don't eat enough protein anyway, then even giving them a low form of protein or a low quality form of protein, it's going to be better than giving them nothing. Agreed. But you could be giving them, say, whey protein, which is cheaper and better, or just getting them to eat more protein. What we don't have is studies that are comparing collagen to whey protein for markers like skin health. We do have that for body composition. We do have that for muscle protein synthesis. So we know that whey is superior for that. That we know. What we don't know is, or what we don't have evidence of is collagen actually any benefit at all if you're eating enough protein? And my argument at the moment, based on the research we have, is no, you should just be eating enough protein. And one of the reasons for that is the way that your body uses amino acids and the way that it breaks down protein into amino acid pool and then decides based on your body's needs where those amino acids go. Just because as you age, collagen levels might go down, for example, this is one of the claims, that doesn't mean that supplementing with more collagen would help that. It doesn't mean that because your skin has collagen in it, that consuming more collagen would be beneficial. Like, your body is synthesizing collagen all the time, even though most people aren't actually consuming collagen itself, right? Your body can make the protein itself and does so continuously. Otherwise, you'd be in a huge amount of problem, right? A huge amount of problem? Okay, not the most eloquent. Anyway, that, to me, the BBC article doesn't add anything or take anything away. It's not new information. Already had seen that meta-analysis. I thought it was vaguely fair, actually. It was kind of saying that it was overhyped and there might be this very small impact. But then when you go and look at the quality of the studies, I don't even really think you can insinuate that there would be a small impact based on the evidence that we have. Okay, next one. Hi, Emma. Could you do a video on CBD oil? Would love your opinions on it. Does it help or is it a waste of money? I've just spent £60 on Supreme CBD oil for joints and depression. Don't feel any better though. Thank you. Okay, first of all, we don't feel silly about spending money on this. CBD oil is marketed brilliantly. It's positioned as this like natural, calming, anti-inflammatory, mood boosting, joint soothing answer to like everyone's problems, right? I feel like it was pushed more heavily a couple of years ago, but it's probably still around. It just depends on where in the algorithm you are and what people are being pushed. First of all, what CBD is, it is the non-intoxicating compound found in cannabis, and it interacts directly with your endocannabinoid system, which is actually really interesting because that impacts things like your pain perception, your mood, your appetite, your sleep, even your insulin sensitivity. And one of the first studies that I ever worked on was on the endocannabinoid system. And we were looking at a drug that works via the endocannabinoid system to see if you could increase insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue in mice and whether there was a difference between young mice who would have high levels of insulin sensitivity and older mice who had lower levels of insulin sensitivity. The issue with this drug was that it also crossed the blood-brain barrier and had quite severe consequences to that. So it was never, or I actually think it did get to market and then was taken off. Anyway, interesting to work on that study. It does mean that I actually had to learn quite a lot in depth about the endocannabinoid system. Now, the issue with over-the-counter CBD oil is that I mean, primarily, the mechanism of action isn't that solid anyway. Second to this, um, most of what you're going to get over the counter, I think there was a study done on this. And now I can't remember the exact stats, but I think it was 80% of over the counter CBD products didn't have the amount of CBD that they said they had in the product. And it was something like 40% didn't have any at all. None, not even a trace amount. So what I think we have to remember with supplements is they are not regulated in the same way that like a medical intervention is, like what dose you're getting in medicine. In supplements, they really don't need to prove anything. And usually what's happening is they're massively underdosing. And when you look in like clinical trials on CBD, you actually can see some significant outcomes, specifically for people with epilepsy, but also on mood and pain perception, even when placebo controlled. So there might be something in it, but what you're getting from like an over-the-counter CBD product, especially one probably that's marketed on TikTok or Instagram or something, is very low quality, low level. And it wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't even any CBD in it whatsoever. So you can't compare it to the outcome of these studies. And this is what happens a lot in claims around supplements, is that it's like, oh, in this really high dose, in this specific population, when controlled in this way, we see these specific outcomes. And then they'll just put like a trace amount in something and be like, oh, look, it helps depression because we saw that in a very controlled study in a completely different dose, probably in a completely different variant of this. And that's the outcome that we saw. So be very skeptical of this. What I will say for each of the reasons that you're taking it, so for joint pain, there's very little human data that it's going to help. It's quite underwhelming. I think most people who do get relief from it is probably placebo. What's going to be far better for you is a good resistance training program, good rehab, and potentially omega-3 supplementation is probably going to be your best option. For depression, again, the evidence is very limited. There's a little bit more on anxiety in some people. It's not comparable to an antidepressant. And I wouldn't be expecting much difference from that. So if you've spent £60 on it and you feel no different, then that doesn't surprise me because that's actually in line with what we see from the research. Like that's kind of what I would expect. I do think CBD oil is interesting. I think it's overhyped like most supplements. I tried it myself when I hurt my back because I would try anything at that point. And it didn't do anything. But also, what do you expect if you're in like extreme chronic pain to the point that you're taking a ton of gabapentin every day, a ton of amitriptyline, a ton of naproxen every day? Like, did you really think that CBD oil was going to even touch the sides? Like, no, come on. So that doesn't surprise me either. And then the final thing I want to talk about today, and this is a topic I'm really passionate about because it gets misunderstood, and you can use what I'm about to explain to kind of debunk or at least understand better any claim around cancer. So this was something that actually someone I follow shared, who I'd met at an event. I just thought, gonna have to unfollow you now. But anyway, it was birth control pill classified as group 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization, the same as asbestos and tobacco. And the person had sort of shared like, this is why you shouldn't be taking the birth control pill, or another reason that you shouldn't be taking the birth control pill. Right. I really want to break this down and explain it because there's a few points I want to make here. This is actually true. The statement is true. It is deeply, deeply, deeply misleading, but it is true. And you need to understand why it's misleading so that you cannot get caught up in this. So this makes it sound like taking the pill is comparable to smoking or asbestos when it comes to cancer risk. It's not. Group 1 carcinogen does not mean that it's equally as dangerous. It actually just means that we have strong enough evidence to say that it increases cancer risk. And it does not measure the size of that risk. It measures the certainty that there is a risk at all. And this is a very important distinction because people deliberately leave that out in headlines because they want to create like alarming headlines and scare people because that's what works on social media. That's what sells stories, etc., etc. Smoking tobacco massively increases your cancer risk. The pill will slightly increase it. They are not remotely the same in absolute danger or absolute risk. The second point I want to make, and this is very important because that can still sound bad. Like if I was like, well, if it's still going to increase my risk, I'd rather not do that. There's more nuance to this. So the pill does slightly increase risk of some cancers, but it also reduces the risk of other cancers. And cancer is not just one disease, really. Like all of them act very differently. But they won't mention that part because it doesn't really fit the narrative that's being pushed here. So when you take the combined oral contraceptive, it is associated with a small increased relative risk, and I'm going to come on to this point as well, of breast cancer and cervical cancer, but also a reduction in risk of ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer, and I think colorectal cancer. Now, your overall lifetime risk when you consider that it increases your risk of certain forms but then reduces your risk of other forms actually evens out, right? It's not actually an increased risk overall. It's just of these certain forms of cancer. Finally, the other important thing to realize is that there is a big difference between absolute risk and relative risk. And this is important to note because a lot of the time, headlines will just speak about the change in relative risk because it sounds much bigger. Like, remember there was that headline, it was like colorectal cancer risk increased by 20% or something if you eat red meat, but it didn't talk about the absolute risk. So I'm going to pull out the numbers on this. So relative risk tells you the percentage increase in risk from a behavior, in this case, taking the pill. Absolute risk tells you the actual chance of that happening. So fortunately here, the absolute risk is relatively small, which is what matters. And when you pull the data on this, of the data that we have, among women who are using hormonal contraception, there are about 55 cases of breast cancer per 100,000 women. Among women not using contraception or hormonal, among women not taking the pill, basically, there are 55 cases of breast cancer per 100,000 women. Among women who are using it, there are 68 cases per 100,000 women. So per 100,000 women, 13 more people develop breast cancer. Obviously, you don't want to increase your risk at all, but that is a relatively small increase in absolute risk, especially when you weigh it up against the reduction of risk in other forms of cancer. And then obviously consider the reason that you might be taking the pill. Is it because you have horrendous periods? Is it because you get really bad migraines? Is it because you don't want to get pregnant and that's the form of contraception you want to use? Like, there could be various reasons that people are taking these that are also important and must be considered as well. But sharing information like that without context. And again, my whole point of all of this, of what I do generally, is to give you the information so that you can then be like, now I understand the absolute risk and the relative risk. I still don't want to take the pill because of that. Okay, cool. That's your choice. Great. And that might be the right choice for you. I'm not here to make your choices for you. But when you hear something that is really fear-mongering, it's just a headline of essentially trying to put the pill in the same bracket as smoking tobacco. It's fucking wild. And then you're making choices based on your health that actually might have negative outcomes for you because of misinformation. That's the whole point of science versus bullshit. That's what we're trying to avoid. So if you enjoyed this and there's anything in this that you think other people could benefit from, please do share it. If you want to talk to me about coaching, head over to esgfitness.co.uk, fill in the application form, and I will be back next week. All right, bye. How do I end? Okay, bye.